Hi, and welcome to Sociology 1. To a sociologist, everything people do is fascinating. Have you ever walked by a homeless person and wonder how they got there, or why no one seems to want to do anything to help them? How about, do you remember when you were in elementary school and how boys and girls show how they like, how they like one another and how they might do so in a different way than we do now? That they were acting as though they don't care? Or have you ever wondered why whether or not the new communication technology has changed the nature of our relationships? Today, virtually everyone uses a smartphone. Most have a Facebook page, and many have Tinder profiles. You might begin to wonder what influence, if any, do these forms of social media have on today's relationships? All of these scenarios and our feelings and emotions about them are interesting to sociologists. These situations illustrate that our entire existence is defined by the fact that we are social beings who live and grow through our interaction with others. Therefore, we cannot hope to understand ourselves or the world around us without investigating the interplay between the individual and the social. This is what sociology is about. Once you can master how a sociologist can instantaneously switch between their thinking from individual to social, from privileged to non-privileged, from Western to global, you're well on your way to appreciating the beauty and the uniqueness of sociological endeavor. So, let's begin our exploration into sociology. We'll start by putting social life into perspective. And let's define sociology. Sociology is the systemic study of human society and social interactions. Sociologists study human societies and their social interactions in order to develop theories of how behavior is shaped by group life and how, on the other hand, group life is affected by individuals. So it's important to note systematic study. So it's done through research in a very systematic, linear manner of human society and social interaction. So human society is the group of people, the social interaction is all the people we interact with in the course of a day. All influence who we are, how we feel, how we interpret the things around us, and how we carry out our life. So you might begin to wonder, well, why study sociology? Well, sociology helps us gain a better understanding of ourselves and our social world. It enables us to see how behavior is largely shaped by the groups to which we belong and by society in which we live. The discipline assists us in understanding ourselves and our social world. Our worlds are created for us by others as well as being created by us. Now, that isn't always easy to get a hold of. A lot of us like to think that we forge our own way through life and no one tells me what to do. Well, we became largely who we are through our interaction with our family, what they said to us, how they interact with us, how they treated us, how they loved us, how they didn't care for us at times. All of those things have had an input on us, who we grew up with, our friends, our school, the economy, politics, church, sports, media, all has things that impact us, that shape who we are. We're going to consider some of these terms and concepts in sociology. One of the terms that we've already mentioned a few times is society. Society is a large social grouping that shares the same geographic territory and is subject to the same political authority and dominant culture expectations. So when you think of society in Canada, Canada involves the provinces and all the people who live in that geographic area of Canada. And you might say, well, you probably are aware that Canada and the U.S. is not the same. In fact, Canada has opinions about the U.S. and how people are and their accents and things to that nature and how they're different from Canadians, and the same for Canadians by U.S. citizens. So we know that we are a society. And U.S. is a society, Spain, France, South Africa, all societies, they all share political authority, dominant cultural expectations. Now, there may be differences within those societies of cultural expectations, and that might be some of the tension that exists in different societies. Global interdependence as a term, considering the world view when we talk about global interdependence, and we'll look at this a lot more in sociology too next semester. The issues in one part of the world affect the issues in another part of the world. You think of what one part of the world does in terms of the use of fuels and fossil fuels. The environmental concerns can affect environmental concerns in other parts of the world. War and conflicts, famine, AIDS, economics, all have a ripple effect on the other parts of the world. Others that affect us, well, in Canada we have the Canada, US, Mexico. It was called the NAFTA. It depends on which country you're in as to how you will label the new agreement that hasn't quite been approved yet. And there are many other of these trade agreements. They are relationships in which the lives of all people are intertwined closely, and that any one nation's problems are a part of the larger global pattern. And this is a perfect era to be a part of, to recognize that, with the political changes that have occurred in the United States and the ripple effect of how that affects other countries. Now, you'll find in box 1.1 on page 6, common sense knowledge, more often based on belief rather than facts. The discipline of sociology assists us in understanding ourselves and our social world. So look at that. You might find some information there that you either agree with or don't agree with. Our worlds are created for us by others, as well as being created by us. Now, there's an interesting concept which is really important in sociology, and that is what's known as the sociological imagination. The sociological imagination is defined as the ability to see the relationship between the individual experience and the larger society. So this requires us to view the world a little differently, to use our imagination. Now, when I see a homeless person on the street, I have a couple of points of view. I have the personal view. This person's here because of their own, not getting a job and their own decision making. Or I could say there's a social perspective or a larger society perspective, and saying, what is it within that society that does not look after all of its citizens, that some people don't have a place? So sociological imaginations are divided into two broad categories. Personal troubles, these are the private troubles of individuals and the networks of persons one associates with on a regular basis. So things like homelessness, unemployment, divorce, family violence, these can have a personal trouble or a private trouble, individual-based function. That I lost my job, I didn't have money, I was unemployed, maybe I did get a divorce, and I'm out of home. These are things that I may have contributed to my own outcome. Being unemployed or running up a high credit card debt could be identified as personal trouble, overspending. The alternative is the public issue. Matters beyond the individual's own control that are caused by problems originating at the societal level. And again, you could put in homelessness, unemployment, divorce, and family violence. Using the sociological imagination, scholars link personal troubles with public issues, societal overspending, dysfunctional societal conditions. Now, along with this sociological imagination, we can also extrapolate what's known as a global sociological imagination. In today's world, keeping the study on just one society is much too limiting in today's world. Globalization, interdependence, and rapid change. There are high-income countries, Canada, US, Australia, Japan, Western Europe. These are high-income countries or developed countries. Those with highly industrialized economies, technologically advanced industry, administration and service occupations, and relatively high levels of national and personal income. Lower death rates due to good nutrition and medical technology, lower incomes, and societal inequity still exist in these higher income countries. Then you have middle-income countries, Mexico, Brazil. Middle-income countries, these are countries with industrializing economies, particularly in the urban areas, and moderate levels of national and personal income. And then we have lower income countries, some nations in Africa, Asia in particular, China and in India. Low income on developing countries, these primary agrarian nations, agriculturally based, with very little industrialization and low levels of national and personal income. Now, many of those countries, and I mentioned India and China, have a lot of high tech and high education, areas, but they're big countries with huge populations, and there's a good number of their rural areas which make up the bulk of their countries which aren't doing so well. Most of the early thinkers and philosophers thought about human behavior more in terms of how things ought to be rather than what is. The advent of modern day or 19th century saw a shift to observing how people live their lives to better understand how they think, and do so systematically in order to verify things in a more reliable way. It was industrialization and urbanization that were push points for this shift in thinking. So let's look at the meaning of these terms. Industrialization, changes of means of production, that is, how people make a living. When societies are transformed from dependence on agriculture and handmade products to emphasis on manufacturing and related industries. So that was one of the big shifts in North America at the turn of the century, was this industrialization in factories and mechanization. And then urbanization often results with industrialization. This is the process by which increasing portions of the population lives in cities rather than in the rural areas. Many people move from being producers to being consumers. Think in terms of Canada. Of Canada's population, 80% of the population lives in cities. 60%, I think it is, of that live in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. As a result, new social problems emerge. This is as a result of urbanization and industrialization. Inadequate housing, unsanitary conditions, poverty, pollution, crime, low wages. Now, the early thinkers, they had a concern for social order and stability. There were natural scientists who had been using reason or rational thinking to discover the laws of physics and the movement of the planets. Social thinkers began to believe that by applying the methods developed by the natural sciences, they might discover the laws of human behavior and apply these laws to solve social problems. Some of the early thinkers, early middle 19th century, such as Auguste Comte, Harriet Martineau, and Herbert Spencer, and Emile Durkheim were interested in analyzing social order and stability. Auguste Comte, he come up with what he called positivism, a belief that the world can best be understood through scientific inquiry. Comte believed that objective, bias-free knowledge was attainable only through the use of science rather than religion. And that's a huge shift at this time. Religion was so dominant in the world that it guided so many aspects, including science. And here was someone coming out saying, no, we must, separate science from religion and study science. Harriet Martineau was an advocate of racial and gender equality. Analyzed how large-scale social structures influence the lives of people, particularly women and children, and those who were marginalized by virtue of being criminal, mentally ill, disabled, poor, or alcoholic. Herbert Spencer's influence constructed an evolutionary perspective on social order and social change. Societies developed through a process of struggle for existence and fitness for survival, which he referred to as the survival of the fittest, used to justify the repression and neglect of the minority groups in the late 19th century and beyond, known as the scientific racism. Now, very influential in sociology was Emile Durkheim. Durkheim is a crucial figure in the development of sociology as an academic discipline. He promoted the scientific approach to examining social facts that lie outside of individuals, founding figure of the functionalist theoretical tradition. One of Durkheim's most important contributions to sociology is the idea that societies are built on social facts. Social facts are patterns, are patterned ways of acting, thinking, and feeling that exist outside any one individual but exert social control over each person. Durkheim coined the term anomie, a condition in which social control becomes ineffective as a result of the loss of shared values and a sense of purpose in society. His observations were that when people lost purpose and their connectedness to other people, they lost their reason for living. He was studying suicide, and anomie was a result out of this disconnectedness. When people get together in large cities, there starts to be a disconnectedness or anomie. Now, when we move towards more modern sociology, we can begin with Karl Marx. Marx analyzed the struggle between the capitalist class and the working class, and he called this class conflict. It was between the bourgeois, the capitalist class, who own and control the means of production, and the proletariat, the working class. They must sell their labor because they have no other means of earning a living. Alienation as a term, this was when exploited workers feel a loss of powerlessness and estrangement from other people and from themselves. And they have this sense of alienation. It's believed that society should not just be studied, it should also be changed because the status quo was oppressive to most members of society. This is under Marx. Revolution was the result from workers becoming aware that of their own alienation and felt they needed to upset the apple cart. Now, another major player at this time was Max Weber. Weber held that sociology could be a value-free, conducted scientifically, excluding the researcher's personal values and economic interests. Sociologists should employ Verstehen, German for understanding, to see how the world the way others do. Emphasis is on the value-free inquiry and the necessity of understanding how others see the world. Important insights on the process of rationalization, bureaucracy, religion, and many other topics. Was more aware of women's issues than many of the scholars of his day. Now, George Simmel believed that the main purpose of sociology would be to examine the social interaction process within groups. He analyzed the impact of industrialization and urbanization on people's lives, concluded that class conflict was becoming more pronounced in modern industrial societies. It's from here we start to move into a more contemporary theoretical perspective. Contemporary, more current sociologists endeavor to create theories to understand these views. Theories are a set of logically interrelated statements that attempt to describe, explain, and occasionally predict social events. Perspective or point of view, looking through different colored sunglasses, is the way I sort of view theories. Is each of the theories is like putting on a different set of sunglasses and you see the world a little bit differently. The world doesn't change, but how you view it can change based on the theory. So what you'll see in your text are sections applying to perspectives to shopping and consumption. You may find this really helpful to go along with your text using those examples to help understand these theories. The first we're going to begin with is Functionalist Perspective. According to the functionalists, society is a stable, orderly system. Key classical figure here is Emile Durkheim. Basis of society are societal consensus of shared values. So all society accepts the values, the beliefs, and the behavioral expectations. That's why it's stable. Society has parts to a whole, with each part having a function, thus functional perspective. Society is a living organism. So if there are different parts of society, politics, economy, family, school, healthcare, all of these parts have a function in society. And it's when these functions work harmoniously that it's like a living organism, and it tends to be stable and orderly. Now, some of the structures that were described back in the day, family, politics, economy, healthcare, education, have function or purpose in society. These work together for the benefit of society. Now, Talcott Parsons, from 1902 to 1979, he was about that societies must make provision for meeting social needs in order to survive. He coined the term division of labor, where it was necessary for this division of labor within society for survival. And there was two types, instrumental and expressive. And we see this a lot in families, particularly families of old. We see that families have been changing, where instrumental are the leadership and decision-making, husband and father traditionally. It's not the way it is now, or not entirely. You'll still find those examples. And then you'll find expressive roles. And these are the ones associated with housework, caring for children, providing emotional support for the family, the wife or the mother. Now, we see this has been changing, but this view is very traditional view. That's the functionalist. Now, R.K. Merton, he was born 1910, died in 2003, he introduced a couple of other terms under the functional realm, and that is manifest function. Manifest function was meant to be that this is the intended or overtly recognized by participants in a social setting. That is to say that families, as a social entity, their manifest function is to have children, raise children, to healthfully and emotionally support them through their life. The latent function, this is the unintended or hidden and remaining unacknowledged by participants. So a latent function, say, of school. You go to school, you go to post-secondary, you meet people. The manifest function is get an education and be preparing for work. The latent function is you might meet people who become lifelong friends, even a wife or a husband you may meet from school. That's not the function, but it's the unintended outcome of some of these social facts. Then there was a term being introduced, which would be dysfunctions. These are the undesirable consequences of any element of society. When families go bad and there's family violence, that's considered a dysfunction. So when we look at education, we have a manifest function, teaching skills, broaden awareness. The latent function of education is social networks and lifelong friendships. Now, social institutions is another term, and this is where we talk about the institutions like family, economy, politics. Structures provide function to society. Manifest and latent, from their perspective, are all institutions function with manifest and latent functions, purpose for being. Okay? So functionalist is an old traditional-based theory. It's a set of sunglasses that looks at the world in a particular manner. We're going to move into conflict theory, or conflict perspective. And according to conflict perspective, groups of societies are engaged in a continuous power struggle for control of scarce resources. Now, the key figures here are Karl Marx and Max Weber. As mentioned earlier, the bourgeoisie, they control the means of the production. The proletariat sell their labor, and alienation can result, a sense of powerlessness and disconnectedness. Today, advocates of the conflict perspective view social life as a continuous power struggle among competing social groups. Now, there's some other terms to include here, and the next two really sort of sound the same, but they're different. Prestige. This is a positive or negative social estimation of honor. Now, what prestige do certain roles have? We have high prestige for doctors. We have high prestige for maybe police and for maybe teachers. prestige, this means it's attached to the role, teacher, police, doctor, and that prestige is associated there. You can go into that role and you may not have that prestige if you don't behave in a manner that is positive. You may have negative, but the point is prestige is associated with how well you do something. It's that estimation of honor. Power is the ability of a person in a society, in a societal relationship, to carry out what they want despite opposition from others. Now that could be power influenced by money, influenced by authority, but it's your ability to pursue your goals and pursue what you want without interference from others, even if there is opposition. And then we became aware of this other term more recently when the 1% campaigns were on the go, and that is what's known as the power elite. A small clique of conspiring and top corporate, political, and military officials that can have a larger impact on the social life of most other people. Okay, feminist theory. Now, feminist theory, if you will, kind of derives from conflict theory. Feminist perspective focuses on the significance of gender and understanding and explaining inequalities that exist between men and women in a household and in the paid labor force and in the realm of politics, law, and culture. Now, why I say it's kind of connected to conflict, it's a power struggle about who has what. So, feminists highlight the role of patriarchy. Now, patriarchy is a hierarchical system where males possess greater economic and societal privilege than females. And many families are still very patriarchal. Government is still very patriarchal. It's largely made up of men, not as much by women. And so men derive or move a lot of those agendas. Now, feminists also look within the homes, where men tend to have more power and control than women and receive more benefit. Housework, if women are working and come home, they do the housework. Men typically don't, and this was known as the second shift. Paid labor, where men are paid more for equal work. Women had been discouraged from working in non-traditional roles, like being in the military, construction, science, and technology. You see, the feminist groups have focused on politics, not properly being properly represented in politics, given the number of men and women in the world. Why aren't there an equal distribution of men and women in politics? This also goes into law. Feminists made initial headway when they won the right to be seen as a person in 1929, Manitoba Nellie McClune. Culturally, they view that part of the Canadian culture, that women are part of the Canadian culture. They have a very good hockey team, and yet it doesn't get paid as much. It doesn't get the same notoriety. It doesn't get the same viewership, and yet hockey is something that Canada is known by. Functionalists and conflict perspectives take a macro view. Feminist includes both a micro and a macro view. Now, what we mean here is that a macro analysis, this examines the whole of society, large-scale social structures and social systems. The micro, this focuses on the small gatherings of people rather than the large-scale social structures. The focus of symbolic interactionalists is micro. The symbolic interactionalists examine people's day-to-day interactions and their behavior in groups. They view society as the sum of the interactions of the individuals and groups. Symbol for clarification is anything that meaningfully represents something else. Now let's look at postmodern, the sociological approach that attempts to explain social life in modern societies that are characterized by post-industrialization, consumerism, and global communications. Postmodern perspectives are characterized by the decline in the influence of social institutions such as family, religion, education in people's lives, and they've pursued that the studies of individual freedom, information explosion, the rise of a consumer society, the global village image, post-industrial society, and simulations are their main focus. Now, I hope this has been helpful for you. This has been Chapter 1 in Sociology 1. Make sure you have your textbook handy while you go through the videos. That'll help you an awful lot with this course. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.